We are excited to be joined by Tyler Greenawalt. He is an NFL writer for Amazon News. Tyler, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to talk NFL offseason here. We're getting a little closer as training camps are getting closer to opening here, but you recently wrote an article about some top candidates that could possibly be Triple Crown wide receivers. So, and you're doing a lot of data driven writing over there, kind of looking into the analytics side of things. Really fascinating read. I encourage you guys to check out his work, but maybe you could kind of give us a sneak peek here. Which players are you looking at that you think could be legit threats this season to actually pull it off?
Sure thing. I mean, it's interesting because we've had two Triple Crown winners in the past, I guess, 4 years now with Cooper Kupp and Jamar Chase, obviously last year. So it's not uncommon as it used to be. I think the one before that was like 2005 with like Steve Smith. And so it was interesting to kind of look at like what makes a receiver go from being just elite to being just utterly dominant in the NFL. And it takes a couple different things as I kind of go through in the article. I mean, number one, obviously you have to be a good elite level receiver, put up elite stats, and especially there's like some advanced metrics that Stats Perform uses to kind of look at that, just like burn rate, open rate, catch rating, and then like burn yards per target. But obviously, wide receiver is not the only position on the field. You also have to account for the quarterback throwing you the ball and the offense that you're in. So, like, obviously, without Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase might not be putting up those stats. Without Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp might not have performed as well as he did during that Super Bowl season for them. So it kind of took those three different elements of a player's background in order to find those breakout guys. And the two that kind of popped out to me when I was looking through the data was Terry McLaurin for the Commanders and Brian Thomas Jr. for Jacksonville. McLaurin, we'll see what happens just because I know he's got some contract issues. I imagine the Commanders will want to get that figured out, though. But I mean, he has all of what you're looking for in a receiver. He's the clear number one. Even with Debo there, he has an amazing young quarterback in Jaden Daniels who likes to throw him the ball and can do it in an effective way. And the Cliff Kingsbury offense has done pretty well just in 1 year in Washington. One thing I kind of mentioned was like, what was interesting about the Washington offense is that they didn't really reach the threshold that most of these receivers that win the Triple Crown reach in terms of being a pass heavy team. Like you need about probably 50% of the time throwing the football. And the Commanders really weren't that. They kind of focused a lot on the running game early on. And I think with some rookie receivers, you kind of want to like lead them into the game a little bit. So you don't necessarily want to have them throw the ball 600, 700 times a season. So I feel like it's one of those situations where you could certainly see a bump in passing attempts for that offense with Jaden Daniels getting another season under his belt and McLaurin ideally being there as the number one, having those elite separation traits with burn rate, burn yards, and open rate. And then Brian Thomas is the other one. This coincidentally had more to do, I think, with his new offensive situation than anything else. Obviously, he was one of the better young wide receivers in the NFL last year in terms of his stats overall. Trevor Lawrence, he comes with his issues, but he's still a successful quarterback in terms of you wouldn't call him a schmuck compared to some of the other guys out there, perhaps. But then the number one thing is you got Liam Cohen running the offense, and you saw what he was able to do both in his one season with Tampa last year as well as his time working with Sean McVay. Coincidentally, if you look at the last two guys with Triple Crowns, they both come from Sean McVay offenses, either literally Sean McVay or the Zach Taylor offense, which is also a product of McVay as well. So those are the two guys that I would kind of say, apart from like maybe Jamar Chase actually repeating as the Triple Crown winner, which I think is certainly on the table, given his nothing in his situation has really changed. Same quarterback. He's still got T. Higgins. All the coordinators are still there. And that would be very interesting considering I don't think that's happened since like maybe the 40s. So those are the two guys I'm looking at. Chase obviously is always going to be in the mix regardless. But if we're looking at purely newcomers in the Triple Crown territory, I would say McLaurin and Thomas would be my top choices.
For McLaurin, I would think that perhaps maybe they would want to run a little bit more outside of Jaden Daniels running, right? That offense wasn't as balanced. And my thought process would be they probably want to take a little bit off of Jaden Daniels in the sense of him carrying them because he was their leading rusher, obviously as well as the leading passer, but try to really incorporate those running backs a little bit more than what they did last year. Obviously, Brian Robinson, the unfortunate incident that happened at the beginning of the season with that. But then, do you think coming into this year, the focus still would be on giving it for him to have that opportunity? They're gonna have to obviously throw more. But if they want to scale back and kind of balance the offense out, obviously your hope is the defense is a lot better, so the opportunities may be limited as opposed to what you say when you have Chase involved, because on paper that defense looks like
Yeah.
atrocious, where they're going to be in a shootout where Washington may be a little bit more balanced on defense, and then perhaps they try to go more with the run.
Yeah, I mean, the Chase argument with regards to like how the Bengals had to play last year is a huge one, just because like, and I wrote about this too, like how the Bengals offense is like the best team, the best offense to not make the postseason. But it's like one of those like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Is the offense great and the defense is just bad, or is the offense only good because they're constantly having to throw the ball a million times a game? And yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those situations where if Washington is going to try and take some of those carries off of Jaden Daniels' plate, like he rushed the ball, I think 100, I'm looking at it right now, like 148 times. If you minimize that a little bit, and you say you give a little bit to Brian Robinson, maybe a little more to Eckler, I still think you actually open yourself up to passing it a little bit more. Just because like I don't think they're going to put 148 more rushing attempts into that offense. There's some other guys I mentioned in the article, like Puka Nacua gets so many targets and receptions, but he's with Devontae Adams, who also part of from the article I was looking at was over history, or not history, over the past 5 years since, or 4 years since 2020, of like players who finished top five in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. And Devontae Adams was on there a couple times, but like him and Nakua are going to eat into each other, so neither of them are like they basically balance each other out. Whereas like McLaurin, I don't think Deebo Samuel is really going to eat into his target share. So like he has kind of that extra level of opportunity that I think some of the other receivers in the NFL might not have.
How do you look at that in terms of when you talk about quarterback play? And we saw what Malik Neighbors was with whatever you want to call the Giants
Yeah.
quarterback situation is, and how you look at that in terms of the analytics. And then do you have another person outside of wide receiver that could win the Triple Crown?
Sure. I mean, I'll speak on Neighbors first. I wrote about him as actually a dark horse candidate, only because he fits again a lot of the boxes that McLaurin and Brian Thomas and some of the other top receivers on that list. His opportunity share is high, his ability to separate is high, and even as much as everyone loves to dog Russell Wilson, he actually isn't a terrible quarterback in the purest sense of the form. He had a solid, well thrown rate. Which is just how easy it is for a receiver to catch the ball. And you saw what George Pickens was able to do last year when Russ was cooking. I think the issue with the Giants is we have no idea what that offense is going to look like. They were bad last year, except for Neighbors. And the other element, too, is like, how much of a leash is Russ going to have? Is he going to get pulled for Jameis? Is he going to get pulled for Jackson Dart? I think part of the allure of a Triple Crown quarterback is that level of continuity under center. And it's why a lot of the guys that kind of break out usually do so with good quarterbacks. Like I think Nico Collins very clearly could be among this group as well.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of like outside of the wide receiver position, I mean, the obvious answer is Brock Bowers. I think he proved as a rookie with Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, Desmond Ritter that he can perform. And now he gets Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator, which Chip Kelly is, for better or worse, an unknown, but at least he understands how to run effective offenses. And then Pete Carroll, obviously, we know that his offense has performed pretty well in Seattle. And looking at from 2018 to 2023, I think Carroll's offenses, I had them 2.3% of the time passing the ball, which is a little bit surprising considering a lot of people think that they were more of a run heavy team. But that would certainly fit into the mold. And Bowers is the clear number one target for Geno. Bowers finished third in receptions and eighth in yards as a rookie with terrible offense and terrible quarterbacks. You give him even like a 10% boost on both those sides, and he's clearing top five in those two. The thing he just needs to work on is touchdowns, and that'll come with a better offense that is actually getting into the red zone. We know Geno is a good quarterback for the past couple of years, so he's really the only one that I could see potentially performing up to the level of a Triple Crown pass catcher.
So you also had a recent article looking at NFL team projections. Which team do you think, after looking into this, did you think is the most underrated heading into this season? A team that was really being overlooked right now.
I have the Jaguars as the breakout team based off of like that performs as team score, and a lot of that has to do with strength of schedule and their division and where we project they should go based off of how their team looks. And what's funny is the second point I wrote about is how the Lions are a borderline playoff team because of similar metrics. They have a hard schedule. They lost their coordinators. In reality, I do think the Lions are kind of one of those teams that might be looked at as an underrated team because I think the expectations of them have now ballooned to this, oh, they're going to win the Super Bowl. And then now they've lost Ben Johnson, they lost Aaron Glenn, and suddenly a lot of people are kind of sleeping on the line. So I think the core of that team remains the same. It's just a matter of, are the coordinators going to be able to continue that thread? So I would say the Lions purely based off of the fact that I think people are under expecting of them in 2025. But I think another underrated team, I do think the Raiders are an interesting team in the end or in the AFC. Um, because the AFC West, I don't isn't nearly as like closed off as people think. Like the Chiefs, the Chargers, and the Broncos are still going to be competitive, but it's not the Chiefs necessarily to outright take home again. And again, same with Chargers and Broncos. They're not guaranteed to take over or even make the playoffs. I think the Raiders, with a brand new regime and a brand new quarterback and a new running back, Bowers, the defense should get better. I think Stats Perform had them at only 6.5 wins. But if we're thinking purely not just looking at that, I think the Raiders are one of those teams that like could very easily outperform their expectations relative to how our predictions look at the rest of the league. Like, sure, would I love to say that the Jets or the Patriots or other teams from the NFC, like the Bears or even the Falcons, would be fun. The Bears, I think people are going to immediately jump on because of everything I just said about the Lions for Ben Johnson and Caleb and all of these guys. But I think like with rookie head coaches, and this would also be a really interesting thing to look at, is rookie head coaches who performed well as coordinators in their previous jobs aren't guaranteed to immediately be good. It'll take some time to kind of acquiesce with the rest of their staff and the rest of their teams. I would say like Raiders and Lions would be my underdog teams, though the Lions are kind of a cheat because I wouldn't consider the number 2 seed in the NFC last year to be an underdog a year later.
So let's let that sit for a moment, Brad, because spoiler alert, I'm a Raiders fan.
Oh.
And what have I been saying? I said the only thing I got right now until I kind of see everything is we're not coming in last place. That's what I have so far. I don't have anything else. We're just not coming in last place. So I want to go in a different direction, and I'm not sure how much you may have covered this. There's two things happening currently in the NFL right now, right? The second round, right? We're looking at 30 of the 32 guys have not signed because lo and behold, the Browns have once again thrown a monkey wrench, but we can't really blame them too much because the Texans started it, right? With this fully guaranteed second round. So now everybody's jockeying to get everything and trying to, I'm sure they're, what's the word that we love, Brad? Colluding to say we all deserve a full guaranteed contract. So I want your thoughts on that. How are you looking at that in terms of seeing what's happening there?
From a money perspective, I think it's interesting because the way that it happened, I think eventually this was where the NFL was going to go, where those fully guaranteed deals were going to creep into the second round because these second round guys have been consistently becoming some of the best players in the NFL down the road anyway. Like DK Metcalf, I think AJ Brown, obviously. I think McLaurin was a second round pick.
They all are Debo as well.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where like these are all borderline first round guys anyway. And with the Texans and Jaden Higgins, they traded out of the first round. So it stands to reason they very well could have taken Higgins in the first round anyway and paid him a fully guaranteed contract anyway. So it's one of those things where it's like at that point not treating him like a second round pick. They're treating him like a first round pick. And I think with the Browns, obviously the Browns had other first round picks that they used, but they probably were the same thing. They're like, okay, the Carson, he could have been a first round guy. Maybe we would have drafted him in the first rounds. The Texans already gave Higgins full and guaranteed deal. We have no real reason not to, except there wasn't a precedent. And I think that's part of the NFL is a copycat league. And once one team does it, other teams start doing it, or at the very least, the agents of players want the teams to start doing it. And so I think this is where it's headed. We'll see what happens with the rest of the second round. Here's the thing with Jaden Higgins. I was actually looking up today because I had a deep conversation with some of my fantasy football league mates about that, because they were on the fence and I don't understand why these guys want fully guaranteed deals if they had never played it down in the NFL. But you got to look at it from, we're groveling over $5 million. And if this was going to be a guy in the first round anyway, you've been paying him way more. I think Jaden Higgins it's like 11.5 million fully guaranteed, and it would have been like 6 or so base salary. So, in a perfect world, you're paying him the $11 million. That's what you want to happen. And sure, there are some guys that don't pan out, and maybe you shouldn't have paid him 11 million, but then the same thing could be done in free agency. So from a business perspective, I get it on both sides. The NFL teams don't want to put themselves in a highly leveraged position where they could blow $5 million on a guy who doesn't perform well for them, or God forbid gets injured. And from the player's perspective, they want their money as soon as possible to maximize and insulate themselves from injury. So it'll be very interesting to see, because we only have 2 guys signed and we got 2 weeks until training camp. I think they'll fall into line because of how important this time is. But some inevitably will sign fully guaranteed deals, and then some will kind of just give into the situation, or maybe they'll find some middle ground that works for everyone.
So we have 9 teams in 2025. They're going to have new starting quarterbacks. So 2-part question here. Who of those quarterbacks do you think are going to surprise some people? And who are some guys that you think could struggle?
Yeah, so I wrote about this one as well, and I based it off of a lot of different factors, a lot of it being just the situation around them. I wrote an article before Aaron Rodgers signed with the Steelers about how, of all the quarterbacks that they could have picked, including the ones already on their roster, he was probably the best choice for their offense, for the Arthur Smith offense that focuses on passes in the middle of the field, short to intermediate, not necessarily going the long ball. And I don't think the Steelers will be good this year, but I think Aaron Rodgers will be better than a lot of people think. And a lot of it comes from the fact that he was not very good the last year with the Jets, and then obviously the Achilles. So everyone's ideas about Aaron Rodgers are that he is this god-awful 41-year-old quarterback, and he could be. But I think in terms of the team that he's landed on, he is a good fit for that offense, and I think he'll play a lot better than people think. I just don't think they're going to win many games. Whether or not that's because of him remains to be seen. And then, Alex, you're going to love this, but Geno Smith and the Raiders is going to be fun. Similarly speaking, I think he is a good fit for that team, just because obviously the connection to Pete Carroll. I think the team around him wasn't nearly as bad as the people thought. They just didn't really have an infrastructure that helped those players succeed. Ashton Genty is huge, obviously. Bowers is going to be fun. The key element is just going to be what happens with the offensive line, if they can hold the fort. But I think those 2 guys are going to be fun. And the only reason I put JJ McCarthy on this list as well is because of what Sam Darnold did last year, and the fact that the team is almost exactly the same, with the exception of the offensive line, which they improved immensely both in the draft and in free agency. So if McCarthy fails, it's all his fault. There is nothing you can pin on what the rest of that team looks like, because you have a great offensive system, a on paper better offensive line, and one of the best offensive play callers in the NFL. So those are the 3 guys that I was looking at. I don't know what to say about McCarthy, just because we haven't seen him in the NFL, so we can't know for sure. But there isn't really a reason why he should be bad, unless he's just not a good quarterback. And as for guys that might not perform really well, a lot of it is sort of the obvious names. Like, people will look at Russ, or they'll look at whatever quarterback is under center for the Browns. Some people aren't as excited about Justin Fields as I put Justin Fields kind of in the middle ground. He could be very good or he could be very bad, but we really won't know for sure because he's played on so many different teams and this is a brand new offensive system. But I think the one that stands out is Sam Darnold on the Seahawks, because the flaws that he had in Minnesota were kind of papered over by the fact that he was on such an incredibly successful offensive team. Like, he was able to execute at a level that made him appear like a great quarterback, and he could still be, but I think it's one of those situations where he's not going to have that much around him in Seattle anymore. He's going to have Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is great, but I wouldn't consider him being the next Justin Jefferson. He has an aging Cooper Kupp. He has Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I just don't see a world in which Sam Darnold is better than he was a year ago in a worse situation. And he has a tough schedule. He has to play against the 49ers. He has to play against the Rams. He has to play against the Cardinals. Not to say that he didn't have hard schedules last year in the NFC North, but again, he was kind of insulated by that sensational offense. Also, the Vikings had one of the better defenses in the NFL last year. Like, that plays a role in how your quarterback can perform. And I just don't see the Seahawks defense living up to that same level.
The aspect of the Jets is very interesting. As we saw today, they've obviously retained Garrett Wilson, and now they've signed Sauce. They've hit on a lot of draft picks, so they're going to be interesting to watch from that aspect of it. But your point on Justin Fields, they're a team that could really pop, like you said, or they could really be down. What is your, from an analytical standpoint, what are you seeing from the Jets? I know I'm actually with you on your point where they could be like probably like maybe a 9-8 team, or they could really be, 6-11 or 5-12 or whatever. But I can't believe I'm about to say this, and Brad, I'm going to get killed for this later on. But I'm leaning. They look like the team that could sneak in the back end of the playoffs, or just be a 9-8 team building on something.
As someone who has been a Jets fan all his life, I would love nothing more than that. I have also been very much a cautiously optimistic but expecting the worst sort of fan, especially as of late. I think the Jets are such an interesting team because they've had everything that you were looking for in a good team that should make the playoffs, except the only thing that actually really matters, and that's the quarterback. And when they thought they had it in Rodgers, he tore his Achilles, and then he was never the same. And unfortunately, they were never going to get their franchise. I mean, Fields could be the franchise guy, but I don't think like they were never going to draft someone capable of turning into a franchise quarterback. So Fields is the best bet for now. But yeah, they have the same defensive guys. Aaron Glenn, obviously the proven defensive coordinator. Garrett Wilson, incredible, tall. It can be nice at times. They don't have a second guy, really. Maybe Mason Taylor in the second round will be that guy. So it really all falls down to Fields. And I think Fields was interesting because he was actually not bad last year. From weeks 1 to 6, like, granted, the Steelers benched him, so clearly he wasn't working in their sense. But I wrote about it that he, in terms of well thrown percentage and like catchable ball thrown rate, he was actually in the top sort of area around the Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Tua, Jaden Daniels area through weeks 1 to 6. And I don't remember like sort of the specifics as to why the Steelers felt that they needed to bench him. Maybe it was him still trying to run the ball, maybe the turnovers. But I think it's one of those things where Fields can turn into a quarterback that is consistently good, as he has proven he can be good at times. They're an interesting team. I think the problem with the Jets is they're going to be at best kind of like what you said, like a sneak in the 7th seed in the AFC. But that'll take other teams being knocked down a peg. It'll take Broncos and Chargers being bad. It'll take the Texans being bad, or the Jaguars as well. So it's one of those where I think I trust more the path of other teams in the AFC more than the Jets, simply because I don't know what the Jets could be. I don't know what Tanner Engstrom is going to be as an offensive coordinator. I don't know what Fields will be like with Garrett Wilson. They're one of those weird mystery box teams that I think have a lot of compelling pieces and that you can make a lot of compelling arguments for them.
Yeah, the Jets are a fascinating team for sure. And to Alex's point about this team, you look at the job that Joe Douglas did there before he was let go. He actually hit on so many draft picks, and the one glaring hole was Zach Wilson. If he gets that pick right, there's no doubt he's still there. That regime's probably still in place. That's just the one spot that they haven't been able to fix. But to be fair, none of those quarterbacks panned out. I mean, it ended up being a terrible quarterback class. So, but he is a big question mark, and they are a big question mark team. It'll be really interesting to see a lot of moving parts over there. Like you said, new coach, new system. It's going to be really interesting to see kind of how they use him. And if I remember right, I think his last starting game was against the Raiders for Pittsburgh when he got benched after that game. I was in Vegas for that game, and the Steelers blew out the Raiders in that game, and he was awful. And despite him being completely horrendous, the Steelers won that game. And I remember watching that game thinking, this is it for him. I knew they were going to bench him because just watching him play, missing wide open receiver after wide open receiver, airmailing guys, just thought, okay, this is clearly, they're way too limited passing. He was doing things with his legs. They were moving the ball and the defense was making plays and they were winning games, but you could just tell the passing struggles were still so apparent with him. So very fascinating player to see if they can kind of unlock his skill set for New York. Now, you did some interesting stuff a while back comparing draft prospects to NFL players and kind of using that as a big part of the evaluation process. Which quarterbacks does this year's rookie quarterback class most resemble, kind of based on your model?
Sure. Yeah, this was interesting just because it actually was born out of something I tried to do before the 2024 draft and just kind of looking at different stats that sort of translated. And one of the things that we sort of realized that stats perform, that catchable thrown ball rate from college typically is translated pretty well to the NFL. The biggest examples that we sort of found were Bo Nix actually in 2023, Joe Burrow, which was an obvious one considering he was number one overall pick. Then like your Mayfield in 2017. Granted, Baker's had a very strange route in his NFL career, but he has proven to be a solid quarterback with a good coaching staff and team around him. So we really were looking at catchable thrown ball rate as well as kind of like well thrown ball rate from college to the NFL to sort of see if there's any guys from this class that can make the leap. And the one that sort of popped out, which was kind of funny, was Will Howard and Shadur Sanders. Now, not necessarily comparing those two to some of the quarterbacks I just referenced, but they performed well enough in college that in theory have the skill set to make the leap. Obviously, Sanders and Howard will not play in 2025. But then you look at some other guys like Cam Ward and even Jackson Dart were also pretty high up there in terms of those stats in college. That was kind of like the first way to sort of look at like, okay, do these guys actually have the traits, or are they just going to go completely off the rails quickly? And then this wasn't necessarily my work, but the guys at Stats Perform have a model where they can look at prospect to prospect and kind of compare these two, and you can make assertions based off of what the comparative prospect is and how they have looked in the NFL. And Ward, for example, his prospect model compared most closely to Joe Burrow. Again, this is not saying Cam Ward will be Joe Burrow or is Joe Burrow, but in terms of his potential in a system that kind of highlights his skill set, Cam Ward could, in theory, become a player similar. And I'm using a lot of like caveat words to try to get to the point here, but it's one of those things where like Cam Ward does look like a good NFL prospect. I think a lot of people thought that too. I just don't think this class was good enough to where he would have been number one in any other class. So Cam Ward to Joe Burrow, we'll cut that one up. That sounds like a good soundbite. And then some of the other interesting ones that I think people would be interested in based off of how the guys turned in the NFL is obviously Jackson Dart, who the model found was the closest to in terms of a quarterback prospect that actually did something in the NFL was Drake May. And for a lot of the same reasons, just like arm strength, mobility in the pocket, I think those were some of the big ones that popped out. And one thing I kind of forgot to mention with the model is that it mapped out the 5 closest prospect quarterbacks. And some of these guys weren't even drafted. They just were similarly. So of those 5, the one that actually like performed in the NFL and so for like Burrow for Ward, Drake May for Jackson Dart. One of the other interesting ones that it's interesting only because if you look at the prospect himself, he wasn't special, but obviously he ended up being good. So for Dylan Gabriel, who was drafted by the Browns, the closest prospect to him was Brock Purdy. Now,
that was my comp.
Yeah.
That
Well,
was literally my comp for him. Yeah.
it's funny because people are like, oh, Brock Purdy, he's so good. He took the 49ers to the Super Bowl, got this big contract. It's like, no, Brock Purdy was the last pick in the draft. No one thought he was going to be good. This was a dart throw. And so Gabriel being comped to Purdy is interesting because while it doesn't necessarily mean that Gabriel is going to be a good NFL quarterback, it means that he has the traits of a prospect who did. So Gabriel is one of those guys where, and this is a story I've kind of wanted to write for a while on the Browns quarterback room because I think it's oddly interesting considering all the different names and faces you have in there. Gabriel would be the most intriguing to watch potentially grow into a quarterback. Sanders, I think, in all honesty, would probably be fine, but I think there's so many other elements that is involved with him as a quarterback that I'm not nearly as interested in what he could become. But I think Gabriel, from purely football perspective, I think would be a lot of fun. And then the other one that was interesting to me, based off of a guy who could actually start this year for Tyler Shuck, was JJ McCarthy. And it's interesting because we don't actually know anything about these two guys as NFL quarterbacks. We only know them as college quarterbacks. But McCarthy, obviously, highly drafted player, and there's a lot of hype around him in a great system in Minnesota. Chuck is in the complete opposite end of that spectrum. There's no hype around him in New Orleans. He is not on a good team. And while he was very hyped coming out of college, second round pick, I don't know, people aren't really interested to see what he can become. If McCarthy is good, could Chuck be good in a different system? Kellen Moore, it'll be interesting to see.
It's interesting. You mentioned that you didn't think Shador would play. Is that a personal thought, or is that from the analytical side that you don't see him playing this year?
I think the Browns aren't interested in putting him out. I think Sanders would be best served sitting for a year because I think part of it, this is like a whole other conversation, but I think for NFL teams, they try to avoid distractions. And I think while I think Sanders could be a fine NFL quarterback, I think putting him out now creates this whole
Media storm.
yeah, and that's completely opposite of what the Browns want to do. Granted, he could be great regardless, but every single interview is going to be about him if he's the starter. And in all honesty, if the Browns are awful with Flacco or Kenny Pickett or even Dylan Gabriel, it's all going to be about Shador anyway. So maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you should just throw him out there and see what happens, and then you can move on if it ends up being a mistake. But I think with Sanders, he has the skill set to be a good NFL quarterback, and I think part of the issue with him as a prospect was that that it was being inflated as to how high he could go or what teams he could play for. And I think if he's given the opportunity, like to sit and to learn, I think there's a chance he could be much better than he could have been had he been drafted second overall by the Browns anyway. So we'll see what happens with him.
Yeah.
But you look at Jordan Love, you look at Mahomes, you look at all these players that sat and ended up being much better players than they probably would have been as rookies. And all you want to do is hope that a good player ends up being good. Like the thing I dislike Bust so much because these guys got drafted for a reason. Like they had the skill set to be an NFL quarterback, but just for whatever reason didn't work out. So I'd prefer these guys to sit and get better, and then you get to see good quality football right off the bat from them, as opposed to whatever sloppiness comes with the rookies.
So here's the irony in what you said. The Browns don't want the media storm. The team that signed Deshaun Watson went through what was it, whatever they went through with Myles Garrett, and then in the middle of the draft drafted Dylan Gabriel, and then drafted Shador, and then signed a second round pick to a fully guaranteed contract. Wants things to be quiet. The irony in that is hysterical to me.
And maybe it's one of the situations where you just have so many media distractions that
Yeah.
you can't keep them all track, and then everyone's focused on everything. And yeah, I don't know. I think like Stefanski doesn't want that. I think
Oh
he
yeah,
wants
no,
to
I
just
I
coach.
actually
Yeah,
I
yeah.
actually like him as a head coach, and I think he's deserved it. If they haven't given him a contract extension, that they deserve to give him one because he's dealt with all of this and still kept the team somewhat competitive whenever he could. Obviously, what he did 2 years ago with Joe Flacco, when he was outside in Black Sox cutting his lawn and brought him in and they made the playoffs.
Mhm.
That deserves a lot of credit. And then the firestorm that has nothing to do with him, but more with what the front office wanted to do, or there seems to be a disconnect in the front office with that, with whatever they're doing, drafting two quarterbacks is just interesting. And he seems to just be standing tall and as the guy that has to manage what he has, he's doing an excellent job.
Yeah, I mean, I think him keeping his job has probably been the best part about whatever the Browns have been over the past couple of years. And I'm as much as I don't really want to see Joe Flacco play in the NFL anymore, I'd rather see someone else get a chance. I think that's probably what it's going to be. I would be interested to see any of the other quarterbacks on that roster play, but if they want to actually like have continuity of their team, they're probably going to go with Flacco for at least 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, he was good with the Colts last year, so.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and he was good with the Browns before that. So I think it's yeah, we'll see what happens with Cleveland. But they got two rookies. Two rookies is better than one, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's a great point though, because when you mentioned the Dylan Gabriel Brock Purdy comp, it's just amazing because we had talked about that, and I had said on the pod when we were doing our NFL draft stuff that my comp for him was Brock Purdy. I saw a guy that was a very similar, almost left-handed version of a Brock Purdy. But to your point, Brock Purdy landed in a really good situation, and clearly Dylan
Yeah.
Gabriel is playing for a franchise that's been a circus, as we just touched on. So the chance of him having success there, him or Shador, it's not likely, and it's really unfortunate. So where you land in the NFL and the players around you, the system you're in, it's all so important, especially at that quarterback position. But they're going to be an interesting team to follow, that's for sure, to kind of see how that quarterback room shakes out as the season goes on here. Now, you also wrote recently about the 11 new defensive play callers in the league this year. And I think this is really interesting because we always see turnover at these positions and the impact it can have when you get the right guy on that side of the ball. So which coordinator hire do you think is going to have the biggest impact right away and could really kind of shift a team's identity on that side?
I think the obvious answer would probably be Saleh returning to the 49ers and just kind of bringing that team's defense back to where they were before. But I think that would be cheating because he's been good as a defensive coach everywhere he's been. So I think for me, perhaps low-hanging fruit on purpose, but Al Golden with the Bengals, you take a guy from college. He's had experience with the Bengals before on the defensive side. I think he was their linebackers coach a bit ago. But that team could not have gotten any worse defensively. So if you bring in a new guy with some fresh ideas, granted, Trey Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart aren't there, who knows if that team will be good. But I think he's one of those names that you had to try something if you were the Bengals. The Notre Dame defense was like pretty solid with him last year. I wrote 34.5% defensive success rate allowed, which was among teams that allowed at least 900 total plays. And granted, will that switch over to the NFL? Remains to be seen. But it's one of those situations where you're bringing in a guy who knows the team already, was the linebackers coach there at one point, and now he's going to get the chance to maybe implement some of the things that he saw back then that he didn't get a chance to. So those would be my two picks. I don't really like any of the other sort of like former head coaches or recycled guys like Dennis Allen, Brandon Staley, Matt Eberflus. I think Steve Wilkes is interesting with the Jets just because his defenses were pretty solid everywhere he's been. But I don't know how much influence he'll have, or maybe he'll have more influence, and Aaron Glenn will be more of like the CEO style head coach. So we'll see. And then like Jeff Albright going back to the Falcons. I don't know. I was never an Albright fan, to be honest, with the Jets either. So he's sort of an interesting guy for me. And then Anarumo going to the Colts. Again, the Colts defense is going to be pretty bad, I think. And I don't know if Lou will be the right guy to bring them in.
I was going to say he runs a very complicated system too, and that's a system that a lot of times takes a while for new players to kind of figure out. So that's an interesting one as well.
Yeah, I was actually gonna key on that when you run these complicated systems to the point that you said earlier, Brad, about what Joe Douglas did. Those are highly competent, highly skilled players that you brought in. All these high first round draft defensive players, and then you put them on the field. It looks great. But then when you have to go build from something, especially if you're talking about you only have DeForest Buckner maybe as like the key guy that kind of knows what to do when you step on the field, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with Kwity Paye. I'm always intrigued, and I always talk about, because football is the ultimate team sport, right? Where a lot of things matter. So like you mentioned Detroit. So it's not that Detroit lost both coordinators. They also lost all of the assistants because Ben Johnson grabbed the assistants. And then you had the Jets coach grab the assistants. So they got stripped down to the struts where they're not, the coordinators are going and then the assistants are going. So now you're like struggling. I don't want to say struggling, but you're grasping from what's in the system already to try and replicate what the successes that you had the previous years. So it's always interesting bringing those guys in. I want to talk about the offensive side, specifically Ben Johnson as a new play. I guess, yeah, he's probably more than likely going to be calling the plays, and then that match with Caleb. And obviously, there's a lot riding on what the Bears have and their belief in what Caleb can do. I guess what we saw in college and the whole hype train with the Patrick Mahomes 2.0 and the angles and where he throws from, and how that meshes to hopefully bring forth what the thought process is that Caleb, who came in with, he came in with the Elway, Trevor Lawrence, Peyton Manning, great. Andrew Luck, great at that level. But we've seen a flash here or there, but it's clearly not been anything close to what we thought. And even though he's a first year coach, there's a lot riding on what he needs to do with Caleb. Not necessarily winning, but to show that this is the guy and he can be what the expectation of his draft prospect was on the field. So how do you look at that in terms of new coach / coordinator coming in with this type of quarterback?
I think apart from all of the schematics and play styles, I think a part of it just comes down to confidence and ability to sort of bring back sort of the swagger that a player had before. And I think like you look at Jared Goff, he was not great immediately as a quarterback in with the Rams. Then he got great because of McVay, but then he wasn't good enough for that team. So then he got stripped away. And then I think you saw pretty quickly how Ben Johnson was able to work through some of the issues that Goff may have had and kind of still does, but he created a system that worked for Goff, and Goff was top 10 quarterback statistically, you could argue, with Ben Johnson behind the play calls. So I think it comes down to sort of building this collective mentality of confidence where I think the Bears lacked that last year. I think Caleb wasn't able to replicate the success that he had in college despite having a very good team, just because NFL is completely different. You're playing with all new players. I don't think everyone on that team was super pumped to play for Eberflus and the rest of that staff. So it really just comes down to, can Ben Johnson sort of instill this mentality of not necessarily immediate success, but of confidence, of building a team that a lot of people built hype around before and turning them into what they've always meant to be. Now, is he going to do that as an offensive coach? I would put a lot of money on him doing that. They invested a ton in the offensive line, so you knew he wanted to upgrade a unit that sort of failed Caleb Williams at times last year. They have good skill position players around him. They added two more in Burden and Loveland in the drafts. The interesting element is just going to be the everything else part that comes with a job. I think like this is some of the problems that some of these offensive gurus, like Cliff Kingsbury is another great example. When he was the Cardinals coach, like you're going to have success on the side of the ball that you're successful on. But the issue is like, is that going to be enough? Are you going to be able to sort of maintain those relationships throughout the entire roster between coaches, between players, on the defense, on the special teams, with the GM? He was just the guy calling the plays for Dan Campbell. As soon as you start to see how the sausage is made, you might feel a little bit more overwhelmed. Now, I imagine Ben Johnson has taken the past 2 years to sort of prepare himself for this job based off of him passing on other opportunities. So of all the new head coaches, I think he offers the most compelling argument to quickly make the switch, similar to kind of what McVay did. But until we actually see the results, it's impossible to know. I just think you see what he did with a downtrodden Jared Goff coming from the high and mighty McVay offense to what was at one time a lowly Lions offense, and now you're kind of looking to do the same with Caleb Williams. So I'm excited to sort of see it. I'm excited for Bears fans to hopefully finally get something nice for all their troubles over the years. It'll be fun to see what Ben can do. I just hope he doesn't fall into the same problem that some of those like exciting coordinators do when they become head coaches.
Two more questions on the offensive coordinators. As a Raiders fan, I'm very frustrated anytime Josh McDaniels gets a head coaching job, but he's back with the Patriots and then the Cowboys. And I want to focus on the Cowboys first. Obviously, America's team, wink, wink. There was a lot of success, despite what anybody wants to say about Mike McCarthy. Offensively, Dak was really good. I know Kellen Moore was there, but obviously Mike McCarthy had something to do with the offense. And then technically, statistically, Dak had his best season with Mike McCarthy as the play caller after Kellen Moore left. Now Mike McCarthy's out, who's a guy, regardless what you think about him, he knew how to deal with the Cowboys. He had that offense humming to an extent. And now you bring in Brian Schottenheimer, who I'm not high on, and Dak is back. Now you add this fireball of a wide receiver, let's say, in George Pickens, who people are probably going to hope be on his best behavior because he's in a contract year. And you have all of these pieces now, and with the offensive line and as well as the offensive weapons, and now getting that running back room straightened out. There's going to be a level of expectation. I'm not saying Super Bowl or anything like that. A new coach coordinator coming into that, and then it's Dallas. So you always have to say, there's being a new coach and then there's being a new coach in Dallas. Those are two different things, right? When we look at the league, what is your thought process for the match of Brian Schottenheimer with Dallas, and then more importantly with Dak in that offense? How do you view that?
I see it very much as a Jerry Jones hire. I think he likes to hire coaches that he knows and feels comfortable working with. I think it's a continuity hire. I think Schottenheimer's been there for a little bit. He knows Dak. He knows the system. So I don't think Jerry doesn't seem to be the type of owner that takes big swings at players. Like, look, Dak is a great example. Dak was a fourth round pick,
Yeah.
and he got lucky that Dak ended up being a pretty solid quarterback in spite of Romo. Romo, another great example. Undrafted guy, fell into being a good quarterback. I don't think Schottenheimer is a bad hire, but he's not an exciting hire. They don't have to be exciting. I think he's pretty average when it comes to his offensive play calling. I know he was like very exciting as the Jets offensive coordinator in like the early 2000s, but that was almost 2 decades ago at this point. So yeah, Dallas is a very even keel team. They don't make anything super splashy. They'll sign the guys that they know that are good. They'll hire the coaches that they know are fine. And then we'll make our money. We'll still be America's team and we'll move on. The Pickens one was interesting, but that honestly was probably the biggest move, in my opinion, that Dallas has done in a long time, that I can remember, at least, just because like he actually fits that team pretty well, and it was kind of what they were missing for that offense with CD and Dak on the quarterback and receiver on the other side. So like it's one of those things where Schottenheimer doesn't compel me, doesn't interest me, but he's not, oh, this team is going to be bad now. I think they'll be probably the same as they were last year, and bearing some sort of fallout from the Eagles or the Commanders, they'll probably be at best second best in the East. They could be third. They could sneak in as a 6 or 7 seed in the playoffs. The Cowboys will always be in the conversation for most interesting team, even if they don't do anything interesting.
So my last question before you wrap, Brad. My last question. I'm a New Yorker as well. How are you dealing with the floods?
I got real lucky.
Okay.
I didn't have to go into the office, and I'm down in Battery Park, so I avoided the subways, but my entire TikTok feed was filled with flooding videos. So I got lucky. It poured all night, so I saw all of it happening, but I got lucky in terms of where I was located. Where are you?
Well, no, I'm in North Carolina, but I've lived in New York all my
You
life.
okay?
Well, guys, once again, we've been excited to have Tyler Greenawalt, NFL writer at Amazon News. Great stuff tonight. Be sure to check out his work. Lots of really, really interesting articles coming from him, and I'm sure more to come as the season approaches. Tyler, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you coming on the show tonight.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It was a lot of fun.